Welcome to this explainer. Right off the bat, I want you to picture something absolutely massive. Imagine we're taking a cinematic aerial journey, soaring way up high over the modern landscape of central Mexico. And as we fly, the modern towns and highways down below just fade away. We're reaching back in time until this enormous, bustling ancient metropolis comes into view. You're looking down at colossal pyramids, broad, sweeping avenues lined with colorful murals, and dense residential neighborhoods stretching literally as far as the eye can see. At its peak, this urban giant spanned over 8 square miles. That is huge. Down below, you are over 100,000 inhabitants, artisans, merchants, traders. We are talking about one of the largest, most sophisticated cities in the entire ancient Americas.
Which brings us to a really profound historical paradox. Who built this? How on earth did a city with such incredibly huge pyramids, perfectly planned streets, and a footprint that rivaled the greatest capitals of the ancient world just rise up from the earth without leaving behind a single simple historical account of its creators? I mean, we have the physical evidence of their absolute genius all around us, but the actual identity of these master builders, it remains completely shrouded in silence. To really grasp the scale of what we're looking at, let's take a quick look at the timeline. And honestly, this is going to shock anyone who casually assumes this was just an Aztec city. Early settlement actually began way back in the first millennium BCE. By the first few centuries of the Common Era, this city was experiencing explosive urban growth, eventually reaching its magnificent peak during the first half of the first millennium CE. Here's the kicker. By the time the mighty Aztec Empire actually rose to power in central Mexico, Teotihuacan was already this ancient, largely abandoned ruin. The Aztecs didn't build it. They discovered it centuries after its golden age had already passed.
So to really understand this metropolis, we need to clear the board of misinformation and separate the myths from the archaeological facts. We can firmly rule out the usual suspects right now. The Aztecs didn't build it. The Maya? Nope, didn't build it either. And we can absolutely 100% rule out modern internet speculations about aliens or, supernatural giants. The facts are clear. The city heavily predates the Aztecs, and while they definitely interacted with the Maya in some really complex ways, this monumental architecture was strictly the work of a distinct, highly organized, and entirely human society.
Actually, get this. Here's a fact that truly underscores just how deep this mystery goes. We don't even know what the original builders called their own home. It's wild, right? We just don't have the narrative. There's no fully decoded written historical account from the founders themselves. The word Teotihuacan is actually a Nahuatl word. It's just the awestruck name that the Aztecs gave to these sprawling ruins when they stumbled upon them centuries later. They looked at the sheer mind-boggling scale of the place and named it the place where the gods were created, or the place where one becomes a god.
And the sheer scale of the crime scene we're investigating today is just staggering. When we look closely at the monumental core of this metropolis, we aren't just seeing a random, haphazard collection of buildings. No, we are looking at a meticulously engineered landscape of power. You've got the Avenue of the Dead, the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, also known as Quetzalcoatl. Together, these form the spine of an incredibly sophisticated urban grid. Imagine walking down the Avenue of the Dead. It instantly becomes clear this was no ordinary road. Stretching for miles, it was the massive central artery that completely structured the city's ceremonial and urban layout. Picture tens of thousands of people moving through this exact space every single day. It was surrounded by monumental platforms and temples, just absolutely bustling with merchants shouting their wares, craft workers, families going about their day, religious specialists, and foreign visitors marveling at the sights. This was a living, breathing, profoundly complex society.
Dominating that whole avenue is the incredible Pyramid of the Sun. This is one of the largest pyramidal structures in all of the ancient Americas. It's brilliantly designed so that sunlight and shadows physically transform the monument throughout the day. And to build it, that required roughly 1 million cubic meters of material. That is a literal mountain of earth and stone. But despite its colossal size, its exact original function remains heavily debated. Archaeologists have even discovered a hidden, man-made cave running directly underneath it. That's fueled some intense speculation about whether it was dedicated to a specific deity of water or fire or maybe even creation itself. Then, anchoring the northern end of that massive avenue, we find the Pyramid of the Moon. And this structure brilliantly illustrates how these ancient architects didn't just build on the land, they built with it. The Pyramid of the Moon is positioned perfectly to create a dramatic, sacred visual connection with the Cerro Gordo mountain directly behind it. This wasn't just a stylistic choice. It reveals a society that viewed their architecture as an extension of the living, sacred earth, weaving the natural landscape and the urban environment together right there in the basin of Mexico. And of course, we have the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. The structure itself is famously adorned with these elaborate, beautiful stone carvings of shells and serpents. But beneath and around it, archaeologists have unearthed some pretty chilling evidence. They found the remains of over 200 sacrificed individuals, many with their hands literally tied behind their backs. Now, while experts still debate the exact ritual meaning of this massive burial, it definitely proves one thing for sure. The leaders of this city possessed tremendous, absolute political and ritual authority over their people. So here's the crucial point. Who wielded that authority? I mean, in ancient Egypt, we can point to specific pharaohs who commanded the pyramids to be built. But at Teotihuacan, we still haven't found a single dictatorial king, an emperor, or any universally accepted ruler in the archaeological record. We don't have a fully decoded writing system that names the person calling the shots. So how do you organize a society to build something this massive without a single visible figurehead at the top? It's a total puzzle.
Well, the answer seems to lie in the people themselves. The evidence strongly points to Teotihuacan being a highly diverse, multicultural metropolis. Massive migration brought people from all across Mesoamerica right into this hub. In fact, archaeologists have found distinct neighborhoods or barrios. For example, there was an enclave of Zapotec people from Oaxaca who kept their own customs and traditions alive hundreds of miles from their homeland. So asking who built it doesn't give us a simple answer pointing to a single ethnic group. It was very likely a massive, diverse coalition of different communities, all living together under one powerful, overarching religious and political system. Let's step away from the giant pyramids for a second and look at daily life. The layout of the residential compounds proves this was a true, thriving city, not just an empty ceremonial center meant only for the elite. The ordinary residents lived in complex apartment compounds featuring their own courtyards, beautifully painted murals, and shared household spaces. They were master artisans too, operating workshops right out of these compounds to produce pottery and intricate ornaments. Looking at these demographics reveals a bustling, highly organized daily life that we can actually reconstruct through archaeology, even without a readable historical narrative to guide us. Now, you might be wondering, what fueled this immense urban machine? The answer is obsidian. Volcanic glass was incredibly prized in ancient Mesoamerica, and central Mexico had an absolute abundance of it. Think of obsidian as the steel or maybe even the silicon of the ancient Mesoamerican world. Teotihuacan craftsmen were total masters at shaping this glass into razor-sharp tools and blades. The production and distribution of obsidian was essentially the economic engine of the city. These objects traveled far and wide across trade networks, giving Teotihuacan enormous regional influence and immense wealth. We also find fascinating clues about their identity in their spectacular painted murals. The walls of their compounds were just covered in colorful imagery. We're talking birds, animals, plants, mountains, flowing water, and some really wild supernatural beings. You might see depictions of the great goddess or figures with these intricate speech scrolls emerging from their mouths. These beautiful murals give us a profound window into their worldview and beliefs. But we have to remember, we can't simply read these murals like a modern history book. They are deeply, deeply symbolic, and their exact meanings remain heavily debated by experts to this very day. Because of that immense wealth, Teotihuacan's influence extended way beyond central Mexico. We actually find their specific artistic styles and political mentions deep in Maya territory, places like Tikal or Copan. But here is a really crucial nuance to keep in mind. Interaction does not equal conquest. Teotihuacan did not conquer or physically build these distinct Maya centers. Instead, they were major power players in the ancient Mesoamerican world, managing complex, constantly evolving relationships without necessarily taking over every single group they traded with. So we are left staring at a monumental contradiction. A massive city existed. It controlled enormous trade networks. It produced some of the most monumental architecture the world has literally ever seen. It housed a complex, diverse society of over 100,000 people. Yet, we still don't know exactly who founded it, and we lack a complete written account of how its political system actually worked. If the people of Teotihuacan were powerful enough to build a city this enormous, why did they leave us so few clear clues about who they really were? It's this profound paradox between their undeniable physical dominance and their historical silence. Which ultimately brings us to the final, somewhat dark chapter of our explainer. Sometime around the 6th century, this vibrant, multicultural metropolis didn't just slowly, peacefully fade away.
the archaeological record shows chilling evidence that the city eventually experienced intense violence, deliberate destruction, particularly targeting its elite structures along the Avenue of the Dead, and massive political transformation. Teotihuacan's greatest secret is still waiting to be fully revealed. That destruction brought a sudden end to its golden era, leaving behind a sprawling ghost town that would sit in total silence until the Aztecs stumbled upon its ruins centuries later. So what finally destroyed the City of the Gods? Was it an outside invasion, or did this massive diverse coalition finally collapse under the weight of an internal uprising? The ruins of Teotihuacan really force us to ask a tough question. If a society this brilliant and this powerful can burn and be forgotten, what does that mean for the great metropolises we're building today?
Welcome to This Explainer. Just picture this for a second. You're standing perfectly still in the dead of night. Towering right in front of you are these massive, ancient pyramids, lit up only by the pale glow of the moon. They cast these incredibly long shadows across a totally silent landscape. This is Teotihuacan today. Majestic? Absolutely. Breathtaking? For sure. But also, incredibly still. To actually wrap our heads around the sheer magnitude of this place, we've got to look past those quiet ruins and uncover what is honestly one of history's greatest untold stories. Let's completely flip that silent, modern picture. We're going to flash back to this city at its absolute peak. The famous Avenue of the Dead? Yeah, it wasn't empty at all. It was the beating heart of a booming, hyperactive metropolis. Just imagine thousands upon thousands of people flooding these streets. You've got chaotic, bustling markets, you've got master obsidian workers chipping away at razor-sharp tools, artists painting these wildly elaborate, vibrant murals, and powerful priests running massive public ceremonies. You even have wide-eyed tourists, foreign visitors from distant lands, just totally marveling at the scale of it all. This place was incredibly alive. And then we snap back to the silent ruins of today, which brings us to the ultimate, granddaddy of archaeological cold cases. What happens to everyone? Where on earth did all those thousands of workers and artists and leaders actually go? Now, the crucial thing to remember here is that this wasn't some kind of magical disappearance. The people didn't just vanish into thin air. Instead, what happened was a profound, devastating, and deeply complex transformation. To figure out what happened, we first have to figure out who these people were. And look, I know it's super tempting to lean into the wild modern speculations, the idea that the Aztecs built it, or the really out there theories about aliens and giants. Let's just nip that in the bud right now. There is absolutely zero archaeological evidence for any of that. None. Instead, the hard evidence points to a reality that's actually much cooler, a culturally diverse, booming cosmopolitan hub built largely by migrants. Archaeologists have actually found proof of distinct neighborhood districts. These were home to communities that migrated from all over Mesoamerica. So we literally can't point to one specific ethnic group and say, they are the builders of Teotihuacan. Because you had people with entirely different cultural traditions living right next door to each other. It was a true cosmopolitan metropolis, a real melting pot of the ancient world, where all these diverse groups just got together and built something way larger than themselves. But here's where things get seriously weird. We're talking about a massive political anomaly. Normally, if you've got a society that can move millions of heavy stones, coordinate tens of thousands of people, and manage massive farms and trade routes, you're going to find an all-powerful ruler. Think Egyptian pharaohs and their giant flashy royal tombs, right? But Teotihuacan? Nothing. There isn't a single definitive royal tomb. We haven't even found a universally accepted list of kings. It's an absolute mystery. So obviously that begs a pretty massive question. How exactly was this enormous city governed? If you don't have one absolute monarch calling the shots, who is organizing the gigantic labor force needed to build these pyramids? Well, researchers think power might have been concentrated in a sort of faceless elite ruling group. Or it could be that authority was shared across several different powerful institutions. So different districts might have been participating in this highly complex, almost bureaucratic political system. Whatever form that government actually took, it was deeply, deeply tied to their religion. The whole layout of Teotihuacan, it looks like it was designed as a sacred cosmic landscape. The builders paid huge attention to the surrounding volcanoes, literally mirroring their shapes when they built the pyramids. And everywhere you look, it's serpents, water, mountains, storms, fertility. To keep this huge, diverse population unified, the rulers relied on monumental ritual ceremonies. Just imagine standing there, attending one of these massive events, The whole thing was designed to make you feel incredibly tiny in the face of their gods.
And, well, part of those monumental ceremonies definitely involved ritual sacrifice. These were very deliberate ceremonial offerings. The ruling institutions used them to show off their power, prove their legitimacy, and prove they had a direct line to the supernatural world. Discoveries at places like the Temple of the Feathered Serpent show us that sacrifice was a very real part of life here, just as it was in a lot of ancient Mesoamerican societies. It wasn't just random, chaotic violence. It was a highly organized political tool meant to awe the public and validate the people in charge.
And these rulers, they didn't just project power at home. Teotihuacan's influence stretched incredibly far, reaching deep into Maya territory at major centers like Tikal. We're talking high-level diplomacy, elite political alliances, and the management of massive, sprawling trade networks. Whether it was through cultural exchange, savvy political maneuvering, or even potential military intervention, Teotihuacan was undeniably the dominant superpower in Mesoamerica.
But then something shifted. Right at the absolute height of its monumental power and massive geopolitical influence, all that momentum just broke. Large-scale construction across the city completely stopped. The incredible coordination it took to build those pyramids and expand the city, it just ceased to exist.
So what went wrong? Well, it wasn't a sudden Hollywood-style apocalypse, no massive volcanic eruption or a sudden foreign invasion that wiped everyone out in a single afternoon. Instead, it was a complex domino effect. You had political instability that likely sparked conflict among the elites. Add to that economic troubles and shifting trade networks. On top of all of that, immense agricultural stress. A huge population needs a massive amount of food and water, so any environmental pressure would have created severe strain. It was the perfect recipe for an internal rebellion.
And we actually have the physical proof that this tension boiled over into serious violence. At key monumental sites, literally the very places that represented the political and religious elite, archaeologists have found clear signs of intense burning and deliberate targeted damage. The destruction wasn't just random vandalism spread across the city. It was laser-focused on the structures of power. That strongly suggests we're looking at an internal rebellion, a really destructive clash between elites, or a full-blown political revolution from the inside out. Today, researchers generally agree we're looking at a classic complex system collapse. Political instability, economic issues, environmental stress, and massive social upheaval that were all feeding into one another. Now, the exact sequence of those events, or which factor was the straw that broke the camel's back, is still hotly debated by experts. But a consensus is that this decline was gradual, it was uneven, and it was multifaceted. The system just finally broke under its own weight. Now, this brings us to a really crucial clarification. The popular myth is that everyone just vanished instantly, like some kind of deleted civilization. But the actual evidence tells an amazing story of human resilience. The population survived, they adapted. Yes, the political system totally collapsed, and the grand urban center lost all its power, and sure, other Mesoamerican centers took over the spotlight. But the people, they kept right on living in and around the region. They didn't evaporate, they just moved into a brand new historical era. When we actually look at the timeline, there is a massive gap. You've got Teotihuacan's peak, its gradual decline, and then centuries pass. Hundreds and hundreds of years just roll by before the Aztecs ever even arrive on the scene. This absolutely proves that the Aztecs had nothing to do with building the city. When they finally wandered into the Valley of Mexico and found Teotihuacan, it was already an ancient, overgrown ghost town. But just imagine being an Aztec explorer, right? Stumbling upon these colossal, mountain-sized pyramids completely covered in vegetation. They were utterly awestruck. In so many ways, the Aztecs inherited the exact same mystery we have today. They fully believed this had to be the literal birthplace of the gods, the exact spot where the sun and the moon were created. In fact, they are the ones who named the city Teotihuacan. They revered it as this deeply sacred origin site. They were wondering the exact same things we are right now. Fast forward to today, and modern archaeology has unearthed just an incredible wealth of discoveries. We've got the pyramids, incredibly preserved murals, huge caches of obsidian tools, and complex burials that map out a massive trade network. And yet, perfectly contrasted against all that data are these massive, enduring mysteries. Despite all our modern technology, we still don't know the founders' identities. We don't have a written history explaining exactly how their government worked, and we are still untangling the precise sequence of the city's final collapse.
And so, we return to our grand, open, cold case. Who really built Teotihuacan? The absolute most honest, objective answer we can give based on the evidence we have is we just don't know. We don't know the identity of a single founding people with absolute certainty. What we do know is that incredibly diverse communities from across central Mexico came together to build a highly organized, spectacular metropolis that forever changed the ancient world, only to leave behind silent stones and an enduring enigma. Because really, if a civilization this massive and powerful can rise, thrive, and then fracture into a mystery that totally stumps us thousands of years later, what does that say about the empires of today?